Anyhow, good afternoon, good evening. It's really nice to look out here, and there are a whole lot of people in this room I actually know, and colleagues on several levels, including some fellow members of the advisory council in which we serve, in which we'll meet in 2 weeks. Some students here who I've known, a couple of you, Han, for almost 2 years now. And that's always interesting. And then within my own industry, the insurance industry, I have some of those people in the room who are longtime friends, right, Vicki? So it's we do have a nice mixed crowd in here today. And I will now look in front of you. We are short on time, and I want to make sure that we continue this discussion. But what we have here today from the Lehigh Valley Health Network, the Director of Management Engineering is Deb Hawkins. Also from Lehigh Valley Health Network, the Senior Executive, Dale Luke. Professor of Computer Sciences at Lehigh University, we have Hank, don't call me Henry, Fourth. And my newest best friend, Mustafa Wali, who is, he did make that more generic now. Okay, good. Because I was trying to email him with a 1-week-old stale email address. A couple points for the starter. One is a warning to the panel that I did warn them about. The email that I sent you and the things we talk about, I hope you didn't read it because we're not going to talk about those things. Because as I also said in that email, pending what the first panel talked about, we can talk about these things. Now, they really do all come back together. But I want to pick up on, to begin, sort of at the end of what was said at the prior panel and some things that Hisham just said. Informatics, as I have recently learned, it's more than information. It's more than, as we have heard, it's more than sharing claims data. Right, Andrew? It's more than that. And the object, as I see it over time, informatics is a process. It's not a thing. I think it's a process. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a process. Informatics will never end. It will always evolve, and there'll be sub-processes. We have information, and then we have systems to analyze that information. And I see it as an incredibly dynamic area, and I think it's an absolute natural for healthcare systems engineering. Now, in picking up, I'm going to ask our two colleagues up here from Lehigh Valley Health Network to really pick up on some things that Donna and Andrew really talked about, and that is the development of uniform measures. But from your perspective, Deb, in your role, your use of informatics, and from your use of it, how can you achieve on your level some uniformity of measures that you use on the management side?
Okay, so we pull information out of our systems. One thing that we have to worry about is the quality of the information coming out, the definition of what's coming out to make sure it is standardized. Because you may find that someone's including a certain aspect of that process flow and we don't have that particular part in there. So first is making sure everybody's on the same page. And once we get the information out, we can go in and do process flows, we can do outcomes versus process metrics. We're trying to drive for root cause to understand a system flaw or something that needs to be corrected. So we're actually using then that information to do more analysis. And to the point of not just looking at past history, but understanding how to be more proactive and to be predictive. So we're building predictive analytics based upon some history, but hoping to be more actionable items more quickly out of those systems. I don't know if I've answered your question or not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you did.
There you go.
And Dale, from your aspect now, and you're dealing a little bit more at the provider level and a little bit more direct basis. So what is it that you currently are using? What is your current use of informatics, and how do you see some uniformity of measurements coming out and what that process might be?
Well, again, as Donna pointed out, the uniformity of measure is one of the things that is of concern, because I can ask 5 people for a bit of information. I'll probably get 5 answers depending on how they define the problem. First, let me start with a little bit of my background. I'm an engineer, industrial engineer, and my role is to lead process improvement and the lean initiatives. And in that role, as we define the needs of a leader, it is to not only lead and manage and control their area, but it's to improve the processes they use each and every day. And the experienced leaders get that. But that's where the information comes in. If they're all using different types of information, then there's a lot of confusion as to what process improvement really is. The one thing that I heard in the earlier discussion that I found intriguing was the division, which we often use, of dividing outcome metrics and process metrics. And as we think about process improvement, outcome metrics are kind of interesting, but process metrics are the ones that we really use to drive those process improvements. So, if you're driving your car and the light comes on and says your engine's overheated, that's one thing. That's a problem. But now what do you do about that? Where if you have a temperature gauge on your car and you're starting to see the temperature gauge go a little higher than it normally goes, that's a whole different story. The light isn't on yet, but you're saying, better look at that and do something different here. So, in healthcare, it's the difference between looking at your rate of CODIs in the organization and looking at the things that we know drive those, such as how many days has that catheter been in?
Now, we have an interesting panel here because Mustafa, we just heard from 2 people who are hospital system based. And Mustafa, would you please explain your role as risk management? In my field, with a couple of my colleagues out here, you say risk management. We can talk a certain language, and it isn't what you're talking about. Sure. Therefore, could you explain risk management and your current use or lack thereof, and what you would need to be developed within informatics that would be of assistance in what you do?
Sure. Okay. So thank you very much, Tom. My name is Mustafa Wali. Just a disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed during this panel presentation are my personal opinions. They're not my former employers or my future employers. So with that out of the way.
You do know it's being filmed, though.
Yes. So I'm actually in between jobs. I'll be starting a new job on Monday up in Boston, so I'm really excited about that. But as a risk management officer, my role, I'm actually in the pharmacovigilance department, which is a drug safety department. There's a lot of different risk management officers in different areas within the company, but my focus is clinical safety, human safety. And before you put any drug onto the market, you need to have a risk management strategy that will work globally. As you can imagine, you want to get a drug onto the market, you have to come up with assessment and minimization activities that could be implemented globally. So we're not just concerned about the US, we have to take every single country into perspective, and I think that goes to one of the challenges. But to design an effective risk management program, you really have to understand the safety of the profile of the product during clinical development. What do we know about the product? And certainly there's a lot of unknowns when you develop a product, because clinical trials are conducted in a very narrow population. You have your inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then once the drug gets marketed, there's a lot of different people that will start using this product. So there's a lot of unknowns. There's also misuse, which could be a problem, and counterfeit products could be a concern as well. So it gets really tricky. So that's one of the challenges. As you can imagine, there's a lot of data that is being collected, especially now with electronic data capturing systems that are used in clinical trials. When you get a product onto the market, your submission dossier is over 100,000 pages. And one of the challenges is that you have different health authorities that have different requirements and different expectations. So how can you design a program that could effectively meet as many health authority requirements as possible? So you have a different regulatory framework. You also have a different legal framework. So once your drug is approved and put onto the market, when you look at your product labeling, it varies from region to region. In the US, when you look at the labeling, you have a long leaflet with very small text, and there's a lot of information contained within it because the labeling document is viewed more as a legal document. When you look at a European label, for example, it is much more concise. But when it comes to risk management, every health authority is taking a different perspective. In Europe, they have a different approach. In the US, they have a different approach. It's pretty clear that nobody really has the solution towards effective risk management. And you know, it's an evolving science. And I guess there was a couple of points that were made in the earlier panel that I could touch upon. One was that measuring true outcomes is costly and time-consuming. And that is very true from a drug development perspective. Because once you have a drug onto the market, if you want to evaluate rare adverse events, you will have to follow up patients for a very long time. If it's cancer, you know, you will have to rely on different registries. So there's a lot of different registries out there. Different countries have different information that is captured. And this type of work is usually done manually. In Europe, to put a product onto the market, you need a post-authorization safety study, which is called PASS. But you know, you have to look at different databases and try to manually even look at cases to make sure that this is possibly associated with the product. So there's, you know, there's definitely room for improvement there. If, you know, there's a lot of different death registries, cancer registries, if they could be consolidated into one database, that would certainly help a lot of research that needs to be done. You also have adverse event reporting systems and databases. In the US, you have two different databases, one for medicinal products, one for vaccines. In Europe, you have vigilance. So in every country, you have a different type of safety database. Now, as far as like informatics and where most drug safety departments and different pharmaceutical companies stand, definitely there's databases. We've moved from Excel spreadsheets to well-defined databases now, and this has been done over the past 10 years. But still, snail mail is used, faxes are used, because everything has to be documented. So the other issue is that not every patient has access to the internet or web-based tools, so that's a big challenge. And then when dealing with developing nations, you know, they don't have the infrastructure to really help us, you know, measure the effectiveness or safety of a product. There's really no data out there. So I think I went on too much, but
No.
pass it on to you, Tom.
Now, we're developing the point and continuing of developing the point. And as Sean talked about the amount of information that's out there, the amount of data that is out there to gather, but to what purpose? And I think Hank Korth can now talk to us about, is there anything distinctively new out there? You knew this was coming, okay?
Well, something along those lines.
Okay,
And,
actually, this is the question I gave you. You know, what's new, what can be gathered, what you talked. I'd like you to take us from Mustafa's snail mail to real time. So can you talk to us about that?
in real time, yes.
In real time.
But you know, listening to the comments on the panel, you're talking a lot about pulling data together, but dealing with definitional differences or different ways data are represented, and that is a very old problem. And in thinking about this panel, I kind of dug back in old stuff, and somewhere around 1993, I went to a workshop on data integration. Okay. The healthcare industry wasn't worrying about that thing. It was all paper records, and it's kind of hopeless, I'm sorry to say. But businesses worry about banks merge. They obviously have very similar information. It's represented differently. You go international. You then have to deal with units of measure. Fortunately, in healthcare, everything's the same, but in some businesses not. So one thing that we ought to do in working in health informatics is do, I think, a better job of reaching out to other businesses that have dealt with similar things and realize that there are tools out there. It's a hard problem, but tools exist for some things like that. Another interesting comment there in talking about all of these data, that's a pile of bits. And then as you start to analyze it, hey, maybe it's information. But to really do something with it, all this information has to develop into knowledge, something that we can truly use to an end. And quite often I've found in previous businesses, but also now in healthcare, that we are blinded by what we can measure. If we can't measure it, it doesn't exist. But yet, newer and newer tools are developing. Sensors are now cheap. The kind of thing that you would have done only in an ICU, you can now deploy in a patient's home. Just needs Bluetooth, goes to a smartphone, you've got it. And so we can think about doing things that were unimaginable. And if you start to think, well, what if sensors were free? What if communication was free? What could you do? Maybe it'll never be free, but it's going to get very close to that. And if we start to think about the possible, that will help us, I think, do a better job of dealing with what we can deal with today. And one dimension of that I think is worth considering is time. The era of things on paper put in an envelope and sent. Of now we're high tech, we're using fax and snail mail. But if you think about the world where your patients out in their lives are connected to you in real time, you could have every second a new blood pressure reading, a new heart rate reading. Not that you may want it that often, but you can get it. So we talk about big data today. Nah, forget it. That's medium data. Big data's coming tomorrow. I remember when 100 megabytes was a very large database. Yes, I've got the hair to justify that. But when you get that kind of information, what can you do? If you have enough knowledge about those data, you can start making real-time decisions about patients. I mean, you can imagine the day patient calls 911, and instead of the sympathetic voice saying, "What's wrong with you?" they say, "Yep, we were expecting you. The EMT's already outside your door." Because the data came in, it was combined with knowledge from back office analytics of all the stuff we're collecting. Say, okay, this patient is about to have a heart attack. We know it's coming. Those possibilities exist. But you know what? That's not 100% new either. The telecom industry has been doing real-time analytics now for a couple of decades. For billing, for fraud, not all that different. But now let me tell you something else that's really different. The whole privacy issue. Okay, you've all heard about the Target credit card breach, and big deal, big fluff, But all you have to do, some money got lost, you issue new credit cards, we're done. In our business here, you have a breach. Okay, you haven't lost money. You've lost money, but more importantly, people have lost health information. Maybe there's some embarrassing disease that's now public. And we can't just simply say, well, you know what, we'll issue you a new body with new health problems. And now that, lost information, okay, that's, done. We can move ahead, which would be the analog of the Target situation. I don't know, maybe you can do that. Any of the physicians here, can we do the issuing of new bodies, like new credit cards? So it's a much more critical problem. There's no going back. And that can lead to an overabundance of caution and limit what we can do. And so we'll need to step back and think carefully with help from lawyers, from businesses that have dealt with problems, and see what are the risks there when something goes wrong in informatics. And if we don't think about those things now, then it becomes crisis management later. So enough for now.
To tie into that, so if you have information in your health record, let's say it's wrong, how much trouble will we have being able to take that out so we don't have wrong care given to us,
How do we know it's
How do we go
wrong?
about
I'm going to
doing
go
that?
to a more fundamental
Yeah.
question, that instead of something that is flat out wrong, like my blood pressure is 10,000, it's real easy, we know it's wrong. But what if we have two pieces of information that are contradictory, so we know one of them is wrong, but we don't know which one? The ships in the Atlantic, ships in the Pacific, so what do? Take the average and say it's high and dry in the Rockies? Probably not. What you do instead probably is think about credibility of data. So perhaps the physician who took my blood pressure gave a more credible number than the machine in CVS. Extending that, what you wind up having to do with your data is label not just where it came from, but then start to establish what's referred to as data provenance. What data are more credible? What providers of information are more credible? So this is an analog of the kinds of things that happen with reviewers. You get reviews on Amazon. Different Amazon reviewers are deemed more credible than others based on their evaluations. Okay. That same kind of data enterprise can be brought into the business. And now I can automate the whole bad data thing. You give me better data, you're more credible, the bad data's gone.
Okay, Dale, your colleague, Mark, talked about a fact that disturbed me. Something that is evidence-based takes 16 years to qualify as being evidence-based. You see this white hair? I hope I live 16 years to see some kind of a change, okay? So, and I'm kind of antsy, and 16 years seems long. So coming back to, you work with physicians daily. God bless you, there's a place in heaven for you. But in terms of the information that you're dealing with, the informatics that you are developing, what could be done to accelerate, and you deal with the idea of evidence-based, what can be done more quickly? What could be done that would help you help the individual disciplines accelerate that and make it, 15 years?
Well, first of all, Tom, I like working with physicians. Let's put that, frame it up.
He told me that, doesn't he?
But what I would say is what normally drives that cycle to be faster is a burning bridge, a burning platform of some kind. And as we talked at dinner, the current healthcare system is not sustainable long term as far as the GNP that's being spent on healthcare. So we're going to be required to drive that change faster. If we don't, we'll be out of business. And those organizations that take 15, 16 years with the current drivers we have by our insurance companies, by CMS, and just knowing with the information we have it's the right thing to do, we know we have to improve value to our patients. And that value being defined as the triple aim, and really going after reducing cost, improving quality, improving patient satisfaction, and doing all three at the same time. And so the crisis is here, and I believe that crisis, I certainly know, is driving us to drive change and process improvement a lot faster than we would have 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And crisis is a wonderful thing, so as they often say, never let a good crisis pass.
There you go. And I saw Mark nodding, so you agree. Okay. And not just because he's LVHN, right?
Yeah.
And not because he's a nice guy.
Okay. Want to make sure.
A thought
Go ahead,
to that as
Deb,
well,
please.
and to complement his comments. The timetable is very long to get these signals. Part of it is because, I think someone mentioned earlier, we kind of have fragmented healthcare. So you may not get the signals you need to give you your answer sooner. There may be things out there down to whether somebody's getting a hearing aid because they didn't have enough oxygen when they had their heart bypass surgery happen to them. That's a signal. The guy that's doing the ear is going, oh yeah, I've seen this a whole bunch of times. You know, you're like everybody else has come through. I figured you need the other ear done at some point. I know it's a weird thing, but I've heard this happen. So those signals are getting lost. The guy that's giving you your earpiece knows that there's a problem. How do you get that information back to us sooner so that you know that these issues are happening? If it's disruptive technology or something else that's happening that's causing these things to show up somewhere. It's the signals. We're not getting the signals in time.
Is there a process to get those signals? Is there a way, or can it be developed? Because as I look at this, it's a matter, informatics is gathering everything it can, even things that are intangible should be included. But is there a process in your system that comment gets somewhere?
Well, I think we need to continue to try and integrate and communicate the care of a patient. Remember, it's all about taking care of individuals. The more we can share that information between different principles and concerns, physicians, people that take care of patients on other settings and other venues, to pull that forward and to begin to have that conversation. And you mentioned transparency. So I think as we go forward, we're going to get more transparency, and a lot of the information, a lot of the data, it's getting to understand where those things connect and that they're not outliers. They're actually showing a trend and a pattern that you should be paying attention to. So it's communications.
I think Hank mentioned it earlier. In healthcare, 10 years ago, we were keeping paper charts and so forth, and the information is a lot more readily available today. And then we look at how we can accelerate that. When I worked in industry, we'd have killed for some of the information that we have in healthcare. And what you're starting to see work smoother each and every year is the insurance industry, CMS, the healthcare providers are all starting to figure out how to begin sharing that information back and forth while maintaining the confidentiality that's necessary. So if we can figure that out, we have a huge amount of information at our fingertips that in many other industries isn't available. I mean, how many other industries can point out that, oh, here's my percentile of patient satisfaction on this measure compared to the rest of the U.S.? We know that.
Good. Now, to pick up on the prior panel, used the term, and yes, Mustafa, pay attention. It's your turn. Use the term population health. Now, everyone has heard him describe Europe, et cetera. So when Mustafa thinks globally, he thinks the globe, literally does. It's not a saying, it's not a term, he really means it. So in terms of informatics, the accumulation of data, acceleration of accumulation of data, how can we better truly manage the health on a global basis of a population? Could we develop information? You talked about Europe. Is there information both in pharmaceuticals and otherwise? Because when you talk about pandemics, et cetera, it goes far beyond pharmaceuticals. But it does tie back into individual health systems. Is there information that you can help the Lehigh University HSE program develop? What should they be developing? What should the academic and other industries be developing that would help on a global basis?
So that's an excellent question. I'm not sure if I have the complete answer, but I guess I'll touch upon several points. One is data integration. When you have different databases, and sometimes these could be in different languages, how do you get a global database? I think that's the biggest challenge right now. But even if you have a global database, it may not necessarily help address some of the questions that we might have. One of the biggest concerns is with regards to adverse events is underreporting. Not every adverse event gets reported to the company or the FDA. The other concern is that we could do signal detection on our own database, but it becomes more powerful if it's a larger database. Some companies have multiple products, thousands of products, so their databases are rich for disproportionality analysis and different type of statistical methodologies that are applied. But for smaller companies, their database is really small, insufficient to really do any kind of signal detection. But to have a global database, I think will definitely help with signal detection. The other issue is that there's a lag. Every health authority has their own database, but that information doesn't become available in real time to drug manufacturers. It usually takes several months before we have access to such data, so that's a challenge. But I guess you also mentioned pandemics, and when I worked at Sanofi Pasteur as a product safety officer, one of the products that I managed was the H1N1 influenza vaccine. There were some clinical trials that were ongoing for other strains, but we converted those studies for that particular strain. So everything was basically done in about a year and a half, from evaluating the vaccine in clinical trials and then launching the product and post-marketing surveillance. So everything was done relatively quickly. But there was a lot of lessons also learned. One was that Google had this technology of the flu tracker, and they were monitoring outbreaks by just looking at the terms that people search in different parts of the world, or more specifically the US, and they were able to pinpoint where there were cases, and it was slightly faster than the CDC. But I guess the biggest concern is that you could have technology that could possibly pick up trends, but it still needs to be validated. So with the influenza pandemic breakout, you also had laboratory assessments and validation from that perspective. But you could have a lot of data out there, but validating it is the hard part. And I guess the other element that I wanted to touch upon was misinformation, especially in a pandemic type of situation where you might have somebody that takes a product and experiences an adverse event that might not be related to the product, but they have some publicity, so they could make an announcement, and this could have a negative impact on your population. People could say that, look, this product causes XYZ, so I'm not going to take this product. So there has to be safeguards in place to address those type of issues, because even the media sometimes picks up on a case without doing a complete assessment. And what happens from a manufacturer's perspective, we start seeing a lot of similar cases coming in. So whenever there's media attention on a product, then we get a flurry of cases for that type of issue. But you really have to do independent causal assessment on each case before you can make a conclusion. So it makes it really tricky. Technology brings a lot of great values, and it also really brings a lot of challenges along with it.
Thank you. Deb, the prior panel also talked about value, pay for value, and being part of management engineering, which deals with finances, et cetera. Are there tools available, or what kind of tools would be available that would help LVHN engage in a uniform, measurable value? What is value other than, and I don't mean in dollar, because you also talked, there's the dollar thing, it costs a given amount, but pay for value. What could be done to really enhance and improve a real good definition of value?
Well,
in 2 minutes. No,
in 2 minutes. Okay. We take a holistic view of that whole service that's being provided. Dale can talk to the people, service, quality, cost, and growth network goals that are established to try and guide us all to focus on delivering the best care with quality results, and that fine balance of, are we right-sized, are we doing the right thing? For us, we spend a lot of time working on, again, the predictive analytics of, is the staffing right? Is that piece of the equation correct for the census levels that we have? So trying to control some of those costs to help that value equation. along with that, we do a lot of support work in the budgetary side. And so I think part of the equation that's never really put together properly is the cost and the revenue side, saying this is my equation, this is what it looks like. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do more deep dive into how do we define that, and it's going to be more transparent going forward when you can get on the internet and say St. Louis can do it for this, we can do it for that. I can go to Georgia and get a better knee. So because of that, we are going to be driven to be more aware of that equation.
Hank, question. Are there ways to measure value and performance, let's say, on a more esoteric basis? Example today, the political decisions are not made, and public policy affects everything we're talking about. And that's kind of my area, and I'm avoiding it. But everything from political science to sociology to demographics in general affect decisions that are made. A satisfactory hip replacement for you might be different than it is for me. Okay, it could be, well, you can't jog in a half marathon anymore. I'm happy as the dickens because I can go up and down steps. Now, so are there ways that you can measure what are currently clearly intangibles, but clearly they're involved in public policy decisions and, frankly, corporate decisions these people make? Are there ways to measure that?
Yeah, I mean, the way you set up the question, it certainly sounds immeasurable. Yet, exactly those kinds of things, in some sense, are being measured every day. You go online, you see ads. Those ads are not something that are just placed there randomly. There's an auction going on for every ad where companies are bidding for placement on the screen of somebody that fits your demographic. And for that to be effective and be valuable to the companies, they have to be getting people who are indeed receptive to that message, are going to click, or going to act. And so the better the knowledge we can have about who you are, the better those will be. So Google gets that knowledge from all kinds of things. They see your searches, they know where you are, they know what businesses you rate, they know what YouTube videos you look at. Google is in all of these businesses, not out of the kindness of their heart, but to collect data, and they want those data to drive the advertising engine. Now, that's just in a different domain. I think differently about a successful knee replacement than somebody else might. Well, maybe I've never had one before, how do you know what I think? But you know something about my demographics, and you extrapolate from that I probably think this way, while someone else might another way. So, no, it's not exactly the same. But the similarities are close enough, especially when you get away from the application domain and down into the technical machine learning algorithms that make these things happen, that we could borrow an awful lot from the online advertising industry. Or maybe just outsource it to Google.
And you have anything to add there, Deb? No. Okay, I was given a nice big sign that said 5 about 3.5 minutes ago. But I will end with the following question. I keep trying to ask questions that would stump these people, and I couldn't do it. But I'm going to give this one a shot. And again, it follows up on some things the prior panel talked about. They talked about things that are, applications in your iPhones and everything's computer, and we're really, really high tech and all that kind of stuff. That's great. Fact, there are 40 to 45 million uninsured in this country, and when Obamacare is fully implemented, the CBO says there will only be 29 million uninsured. Fact, 25% plus of the people who walk the streets of the United States of America do not have a high school education. How do we engage those people, the very people who are still walking into your ERs? How do we engage them to do that? Ideas? And this would be for anybody from the good of the order sense. I figured I had end on this thing written down for the good of the order, because all this sounds great in an academic setting. There are 40 million people out there who don't know, don't care until they're lying on that gurney. How do we reach them? How do we do that? Is there a what? Yeah, I'm looking for an answer. Any comments?
They have smartphones.
Yeah, smartphones.
The number of people who have smartphones, even in that demographic, well, I don't have the hard data, but I would conjecture is surprisingly high. A lot of it is a matter of priorities. We think about today, we don't imagine we're going to be sick. Yeah, I'm guilty of it too.
To build on Hank's comment, I mean, we've done just random observations of people coming into the emergency room. Nearly everybody in the emergency room sitting there on their smartphone. And, you know, so the technology is there. Now, do they know how to use it appropriately to seek out the appropriate medical care or to improve their health? Maybe not. Probably
But it's
not.
a start.
But at least they do have the technology. The bridge is now, how do we motivate, how do we make it easy to use? Got to make it into a game.
So, my team, Michael Kimball, has been spending a lot of time at 17th Street. And one of the challenges he's brought up and he's talked about is the multicultural language barriers, not necessarily, you know, what you're pointing here, but rather that you have to get to these people and you have to do that through speaking their language and being able to provide interpreters so that they understand the care they're going to be given. Huge hurdle in different pockets, in different areas where you have multicultural settings. So part of it is begin to try and provide that service so that there isn't a problem with somebody trying to understand what kind of care they're giving or what you're trying to tell them. Now that's in the moment that you're there in the doctor's office or in the hospital. How do you entice them in? That's the conversation you just had on.
Maybe some information you could have in the ER and your urgent care centers is does a member of the family have a smartphone? Yes or no? Maybe that's something we should start to gather. I don't know. Anyway, questions before Hisham grabs my jacket and says, get the heck off here. But it's not the first time I've overrun. Please come up. So can you come up here so people can No.
So I guess the question I would pose is, why do we continue to accept such a low bar in healthcare for the applications of technology? Why is it that we would accept not using the things that transform a lot of industrial systems engineering concepts, principles, that really transform the remainder of American industry? So the whole spectrum of qualitative, quantitative analytics, predictive modeling, simulation, operations research, embedding human factors. These things have transformed American industry, yet we set, I think as we heard, such an incredibly low bar that our hope is to get accurate data. Incomprehensible, I think, when you think what Google does, or if you order a magazine and they can profile what you order to do predictive modeling. So I guess it's a bit disconcerting that here at a hotbed of industrial systems engineering, and not to imply that this institution is not doing that, but collectively, from a healthcare perspective, the incredible opportunity that exists, yet we continue to live in the realm of an incredibly low bar that wouldn't be acceptable really in any other industry. So I just would be curious how the panel views that and how we can take these conceptual frameworks that have really transformed major segments of the economy, whether it's how FedEx does things. You could make an endless list of things that go back with the application of these conceptual principles, yet medicine seems to be recalcitrant in any type of implementation for this.
I'll take a shot at it. The computer scientists will address economics. That kind of makes sense. But Something that's unique to healthcare is that the consumer often neither chooses nor pays for the product that the consumer, quote, buys. So if I'm buying a car, I go read about it, analyze it, I test drive it, spend a lot of time worrying about optimizing that. And so the companies then have to optimize to me and my needs. If I'm having a heart attack, I probably don't go on Google and see which hospital's got a discount on heart surgery this week and choose to go to that one. I just go wherever. And because it's not, an exciting purchase, you're excited about buying a product. You don't plan in advance how you would do that. And so disconnect then between the payer, the chooser, the provider, the consumer. I have a hard time thinking of another business that has that same disconnect. And that might in part at least explain some of the things you're addressing.
So I would just say, if you were to go to a hospital, and does anybody here know what the observed expected ratio is for mortality in the hospital they go to? It's all publicly reported. So for a heart attack and your acute event, obviously it's hard to do discrimination on that. But as we look at the transition to population health, and you look at your healthcare systems, if you had a hospital or a system that had an observed expected mortality ratio of 1.3, I think the informed consumer has access to that. That may be part of the problem, but I'm not sure that explains healthcare's reticence to take on a lot of those conceptual frameworks that are, contemporaneous data analytics. And it's done every day. Walmart does it as we're speaking. Yet healthcare, that's almost science fiction.
Anybody else? If not, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the panel.
I was at a conference about a couple of months ago, and it was a RIMS conference that had a lot of pharmaceutical folks, and Mustafa was there, and I was one of the speakers. And what I realized, being midway through the conference, that every person in that conference had a disclaimer. So don't feel real bad about Mustafa's disclaimer. It's the industry standard, I guess, in the pharmaceutical industry. So I had to give my own disclaimer, although I didn't have one. I would like to second what Dr. Wood mentioned about the use of systems engineering. We've had the pleasure of working with a large number of industries, ranging from the providers, the payers, the regulators, and everything in between, from the consultants, the IT, the pharmaceutical industry. And we have noticed the same thing, and that is they're very slow in adapting a lot of the success tools in the UPS and the airline industry and the manufacturing industry. And these tools are applicable to almost every aspect of healthcare. And there's a slow, even within the 3 years, we're noticing a beginning of change. When we first started talking to the healthcare providers, it was very difficult to get a student to do even a project for them. And now, 3 years later, they're starting to get the idea of how these tools can actually be helpful, not only on the operational side, not only on the side of optimizing care or throughput of patients, but also on the clinical side. What is the optimal dosage for chemotherapy? That's a mathematical equation. We do have here at Lehigh the capability of running HPC, high performance computing, which is big data analytics, and we offer this as a service to the public. So we welcome every institution that you represent to partner with Lehigh at various levels, at PhD levels, in terms of research, at graduate and undergraduate levels, and to utilize or to use the different tools and services that we do have. We have years of experience, as you heard Dr. Tomas mention about the industrial engineering being the second in the country in terms of age and establishment. So we do have a lot of history of experience. We have faculty that are working on the healthcare analytics and finance. We have people working on the process flow optimization simulation. We also have people, we're going tonight actually with a group of people to the FDA to present one of our projects that our executive team. 2 weeks ago we were at NIH, and a week before that we were at Harvard Medical School. So we're starting to see the momentum. We're hoping that momentum picks up faster and faster as more people realize the importance of systems engineering. The comment that we always hear from physicians, We're not going to accept an engineer to come in and tell us cookbook medicine, and that's not what we're doing. As system engineers, we're not trying to tell you how to treat a patient. What we're trying to do is make your decision process easier, reduce the variability in healthcare. When we talk about 30% waste, when we talk about 100,000 deaths and 1.3 million injuries a year, that's what we're really after, reducing those numbers by reducing variabilities. And one of the things that we've been constantly noticing as people are implementing, hundreds of millions of dollars on IT systems and computerized systems, but they still have a paper mentality in the way they handle these computerized systems. 80% of the data is unstructured, which means it makes it more and more complex to do any type of analytics or information, or as mentioned, change it into knowledge or even to expert knowledge. That makes it almost impossible. So only 20% of the data that is collected in healthcare is even structured that you can even do a quick search or query on the data, which means a lot more analytics is needed. I've been to a number of conferences with CIOs of a variety of different healthcare institutions at a national level, and I asked them the question, please define informatics. And to my surprise, that every single CIO defined informatics from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum, and none of them had a true understanding of how analytics fits into this informatics. So everybody who had a staff of one or two called, we have an informatics department. When we looked at what they've done is basically change data into information, and that's not informatics. So the definition of informatics and the tools that can be used, we're hoping this event could be an eye-opener and an opportunity to collaborate with Lehigh University and other universities that are doing this. Our program is one of 5 in the country, but I can guarantee you within the next 2 years you're going to see 20 other programs, and those are programs, some of which have been approaching us to mimic and copy what we're doing. So there's a lot more attention nationally. It's a slow pace. We're hoping it picks up, Dr. Wood, and more collaborations could happen. But we're hoping that this is a starting point. And again, I would like to thank you so much for attending today. And please do not leave. You don't have to leave. I mean, this is just the end of the formal part of our discussion tonight. But please feel free to, network and meet. We have some wonderful folks from a variety of different industries here today. And please feel free to network. And thank you again, and have a wonderful night.